So, folks, I have been a co-host on The Line now for several months, and I'm really excited to finally begin presenting you guys different conversations that I've had with callers into the Transatlantic Call-In Show, which again is a show hosted on The Line. All of you should go check out The Line. You can find a link to go subscribe down in the description, as well as links to their Patreon and their merch store. Go check it out. It's really fun. People call in, and specifically on the show that I'm on, but there are many others that you can check out. People call in to ask about trans issues and talk or debate about trans rights, trans people, and also to learn. So you never quite know what you're going to get on this show, and I'm really excited to be a part of it and also to finally have a way to debate or interact with people who have different ideas from me in a little bit more of an equal footing. So I'm not just yelling at commenters or yelling at chatters anymore. Now it is, in fact, talking with and debating ideas with people who are actually talking to me. So check it out. It's really, really cool. Go check out the original episode if you want to see it all in full. And also, every Thursday, the Transatlantic Call-In Show is on live. So you can also call in if you have an idea you want to run by the co-hosts, or if you want to debate a different thing. Whatever you want. But it is live every Thursday. Go check it out. It is really, really fun. Link down to the original episode as well down in the description. And I hope you enjoy.
So let's talk to, I think here, this call will be good. Luke in Kentucky wants to talk about puberty suppression and how that relates to gender affirming care for minors. So Luke.
Let's do it.
Yeah, Luke, you are live on the line with Arden and Jack. And real quick before you get started, I just want to say to all the people waiting in the queue, I know you can hear me. We're not going to be able to get to the rest of you today. I'm so sorry, but I do thank you for calling in. And please do call back in the future on future episodes. But go ahead, Luke, and let's get into it.
Yes, I just would like to caution everybody from targeting trans people in any way in public. That is absolutely asinine. I don't want to be antagonistic in any way towards these groups of people. I've been reading about this for a couple of years. I've got a large family and very, very many nieces and nephews. So I've been reading about this for years. And one thing I've never really heard discussed is it's always been my understanding that puberty is essentially the body's way to mature the mind and the genitalia and the physical body. And if you don't allow somebody to go through puberty, they will be undeveloped. Not only will their genitalia be undeveloped, but their mind will also be undeveloped. I've never really heard that talked about much.
Yeah. So my familiarity of this with regard to the research anyway is that our understanding of how puberty suppression can affect cognitive development is already kind of considered in our care guidelines. So typically, no patient is allowed to be on just puberty blockers for a period of longer than 2 years. After that 2 years, you either have to start introducing cross-sex hormones, or you have to cease use completely and resume your endogenous puberty. And that the primary negative impacts of cognitive development or bone density, for example, all really start to become statistically significant after that 2-year mark. Doesn't mean that there aren't risks before, but I mean, that's just medicine in general. There are always risks with medicine, and doctors are always trying to do a weight of, cost benefit analysis.
Okay, interesting. I've got to ask you about this since I've been reading about this for a while. I'm sure you know about the whole WPATH thing, and Dr. Marcy Bowers coming out and saying that to date she's unaware of any individuals claiming to be able to have orgasms if they're put on puberty suppressants at 10 or 2. I mean, does that not seem like we're setting these people up for failure if that's the case?
I've heard Marcy Bowers say something along those lines. I have talked to many trans people who have had bottom surgery, who were on puberty blockers, who have not had problems. Like, it's very, very normal after genital surgery for the first like year or even 2 years sometimes, because nerve regrowth takes like a long time often, to lack sensitivity. And so like it's really difficult. And for some people, sure, in very rare cases, zero functionality does happen. But I have not heard that no person who started puberty blockers at Tanner stage 2 has the capacity to orgasm. That's the first time I've ever heard that claim.
That's from the Supreme Court versus U.S. Department of Ed v. Louisiana. It's Dr. Marcy Bowers. She's the head of WPATH. And it came out in some documents that they had a doctor working with them that published some internal documents and like board postings. And that it was presented to the Supreme Court. That's where that comes from. It's case number 24A78, U.S. Department of Ed v. Louisiana. And, it just seems like the science needs a lot of maturing. Because I was reading some studies about this, and I was looking at just how this would affect youth. And the studies I were reading were measuring genitalia size in single-digit centimeters for these individuals. And that just seems kind of crazy to me. Like, that seems like you're leaving them with nothing to work with.
Definitely atrophy can happen if in certain cases. Atrophy can happen in general when you're taking certain medications like this, but I will look into that case. I haven't seen that, so I can't comment specifically on that case. I know I've heard Marcy Bowers say a lot of stuff that I think is I haven't seen substantiated. I've heard her again, like as from just like sorry, let me reverse here. I haven't looked into this case, so I don't know what evidence is presented. I've heard Marcy Bowers say similar things, but I've only heard her say them. I have not seen like any statistical evidence of that. But for sure, like when we're doing medicine, right, we are always factoring in the negatives. Every single medicine has side effects and consequences in medicine. And the whole point of medicine is to say certain outcomes, like you being alive, you having a good quality of life, are worth risking certain negative consequences to receive medication. And that's across the board. Every single medical intervention faces the same problem. As far as do we need more evidence? I'm always in favor of more research, more evidence, better science, better informed guidelines and policies and things like that. I don't think that the evidence for access to gender affirming care for minors is as weak as people want to make it out to be. But like, sure, like in general, I'm down for getting more better evidence. But to me, the whole purpose of, and this isn't to me, this is just what the purpose of medicine is to make the best informed decision with the evidence that's available, even if we're acknowledging that the evidence is imperfect, the evidence is incomplete. There are things we may or may not know. And as of right now, it seems to be the case that affirming somebody's gender, giving them access to, patient-led care, meaning like if the patient says, I don't want to start puberty blockers this early because it might lead to better results on genital surgery down the line, then I think that's something that should be considered. But for sure, I have heard that sensitivity is definitely different or even more difficult if they had been on puberty blockers from Tanner stage 2. And so I think I've even heard some doctors who are prescribing like testosterone gel in very small doses for young teens who are like on puberty suppression. That way they can maintain functionality of their genitals so that surgery results will be better.
And I would also throw out there, if you don't mind me interjecting, Luke.
I just want to say I love what you're saying, because I've talked to a lot of people about this, and it seems like people just have automatic pushback whenever you talk about this in any sort of like critical way. And all I'm trying to advocate for is advancement of the science, to mature the science, grow the science, dial in the science, make the science better. Science doesn't need to stagnate. Science grows and develops and matures, and we learn new things, and it progresses, and we learn how to treat things in a better way. And that's all I'm trying to advocate for. Because I don't know if you read about some of the way that they do specifically male to female. Like I told you, some of these studies measured genitalia in centimeters instead of inches. They use what's called peritoneal tissue because they don't have hardly any tissue to work with. And peritoneal tissue is basically your gut lining, and it doesn't have nerve.
Well, to be fair, Luke, if I can interject, peritoneal tissue is used in several different methods of gender-affirming surgery, even not regarding situations where there's limited tissue available. There are even some methods that primarily use peritoneal tissue, so that's not particularly remarkable as far as I can tell. But I don't disagree. Evidence should advance and should inform better guidelines. But that doesn't mean that in the meantime, we neglect to treat children with the options that we have available.
And I just want to add that we also don't necessarily have great understanding of like the science behind orgasms, right? Like that's not,
yeah, that's true.
That's still like an understudied part of like biosciences. And so one thing I will point out is that there was a study done in 2023 about the effect of puberty suppression on sexual functioning in transgender women after gender-affirming surgery. It was published in Sexual Medicine. And in that study, they took a group of trans women who had experienced early and late puberty suppression via hormone blockers and stuff, and looked at whether or not they were able to achieve orgasm after bottom surgery. And there appeared to be no correlation, at least with this group, between early and late puberty suppression and ability to achieve orgasm. And one of the trans women who was studied was not able to experience orgasm before surgery, but was able to after. So like it's a complicated field of study, and like the trade-offs aren't fully understood, but that's kind of true of a lot of different medical interventions.
I'm also seeing Marcy Bowers here has released a statement basically saying that she feels slightly misrepresented by some of those quotes, because I think the quote in that case was actually taken from a different location, where Marcy Bowers has specifically said that she felt slightly misrepresented. And that it's definitely a more nuanced conversation, and there's a lot of unknowns, but that doesn't mean that like people aren't getting sexual function, that like the evidence for an understanding of sexual function is like maybe limited on specifically people who receive puberty blockers in those instances. She went on to say, consider a consultation with a gender surgeon prior to blockers. Not all puberty blocked individuals will have sufficient growth going into puberty blockers, though puberty may be deemed beneficial for some. And if you can possibly stand a bit of puberty, the extragenital skin growth, likely orgasm and potential fertility may be attractive enough to consider the option. So, I mean, and these are things that, by the way, like I got offered puberty blockers when I was 14. And one of the first things that they did was offer like fertility preservation and things like that. And so we were having conversations about this. So like, well, I appreciate your concern, and I agree, we should be looking into these things, understanding them more so we can have more developed guidelines. These are things that are already kind of known and considered and informed to the patients and their parents when they are considering taking these sort of medications.
I guess I'm just sort of going off, the rally cry that I always think of is, it always affirm somebody's gender. And it's just, it's just so complex, and it's so nuanced, and I don't think a political rally cry should be informing medical decisions. And I think that's a bit toxic, and that we can do away with that, and we can talk about things in a more nuanced way. Particularly, like I said, the peritoneal tissue, my understanding is it doesn't have any nerve right? So if you had somebody that was female to male and had, let's say, a couple centimeters to work with, they would be like 90% peritoneal tissue, which only has pressure sensitive. It doesn't have like typical touch sensation. It's just sensitive to pressure, kind of like your internal bowels. So you're talking about 90% of somebody's genitalia that's made up of tissue that barely can.
So I don't know that that's necessary. I'm not going to just take your word for it. I haven't heard that. I don't know that's necessarily true that there's no nerve ending. And there also are other benefits to peritoneal tissue, like, for example, that it is often self-lubricating. So that is also appealing to a lot of trans folks when they're considering what kind of genital surgery they want. But I just want to point out that you said you don't think the political rally cry of like always affirm someone's gender should be informing medical interventions. And I just want to point out that it isn't. Like I just pointed out, Marcy Bowers is even saying that if the patient feels like they can stand a bit of puberty, that they should consider doing so because there may be positive benefits to doing so. And I would say that the political rallying cries that are informing policy and medical interventions right now are strictly anti-trans conservative ones, right? The medical field has always been on patient-led without a destination in mind. When they're saying a young person assigned male comes to them saying, hey, I have gender dysphoria, I think I'm a girl, I want to transition, they're not giving that kid medicine saying, we're going to make you a girl. They're going to say, right now you're telling us you want to transition and like have a feminized puberty, so we're going to start moving you in that direction. They don't have a destination in mind. However, the far right anti-trans policies that are coming out in red states all over, including Texas, are restricting patients' ability to access any care, which I think that's the actual example of political rallying cry informing medical interventions that is actually happening. Nobody is saying like, always affirm, always give them all the care. They're going through stages of evaluation and they're getting, talking to different doctors throughout a lot of this. Whereas in these red states where care is being restricted, it's just not even an option. That sounds like a far greater evidence of political intervention affecting care than the affirming trans people approach.
I also just want to throw out there, because you've mentioned peritoneal tissue for bottom surgery. I would also mention that one of the cool things about bottom surgery is that those nerves generally grow in. So like, whereas where the tissue might originate from doesn't have any sense of touch, when it is then used for bottom surgery, the understanding is that it can take like anywhere from a year to 2 or 3 years, but sensation nerves grow into that tissue as part of like the healing process.
Well, I know one study I was tissue for construction of a neovagina canal in gender affirming vaginoplasty, and the doctor talks about how that they only use peritoneal tissue in cases where there isn't other tissue access. Like they're basically saying that a lot of cases, a lot of clinics, that's like a secondary surgery that they only do in the worst cases. If you have any other option other than peritoneal tissue, that's what you want to use, because of it's not that that the nerve tissue cannot grow into this. That like it doesn't support the growth of neurons in the way other tissue would, because it's not typical tissue. It's your internal tissue. It's your gut tissue. So it doesn't have.
Yeah, but it grows over time.
And what you're describing, Luke, is doctors saying, like, what you're describing is doctors informing patients and being aware of the medical risks of saying, like, and by the way, I had a consult with a doctor here in Texas who performs the peritoneal pull-through method because I thought that I wanted that. We had a great conversation where he was like, if you want, I can absolutely do that. There are benefits to it. However, he said, not because he's worried about lack of sensation. He said every single patient he's ever had has sensation and has had the ability to orgasm. But what he said is he prefers to leave that because there are certain side effects that can happen where there are like certain ruptures or tears. And in those instances, it's always, once you take the peritoneal tissue, it's really hard to get more. And so he said he prefers to leave it there. That way, if there's any revisions that need to happen, there's tissue there that is fresh and healthy and available to harvest for those kinds of situations. So again, I'm not really, it doesn't sound like you're really being like anti-genital surgery or anti-gender affirming surgery. It just sounds like you're saying like, oh, you're noticing that there's questions in the medical field about certain elements of practice, which again is just how medicine works. Like there's lots of, I mean, hell, do you know how many people are on GLP-1s, dude? We don't have very much information at all on those. We're having new information where we're like, oh wow, it does this, and it does this, and it does this. That's really cool. But there's a lot of stuff we still don't know because that's just how medicine works. We find something has a clinical benefit and we say like, hey, as of right now, the evidence is suggesting that this is really beneficial for these causes. So let's start using it. And once we start to understand better, we can evolve our guidelines to make the care even better and to reduce risks of side effects even better.
Yes, and this is the type of conversation that I believe has to happen in order to get care back in the, I think, what is it, like 25 states now that don't allow gender-affirming care for minors. We kind of have to talk about like the bad facts or whatever you want to call it of the medicine, and talk about we're maturing it, and talk about how we're growing it if we want to get it back in those states, because they're like a political football almost for both sides, and I'm just kind of the guy in the middle saying, let's talk about some of the bad things here so we can admit some of this and move forward and mature the science, help these people, not limit their access to care, but just understand the risk and benefits better as a society. Because I think that's kind of where we're at now, is that half of America thinks that the risks are really great to the point where they've made it illegal in those states. And and I, like I said, I just caution anybody against any kind of pecker checking bathroom policies. I think that's absolutely absurd.
I agree.
We're gonna have pecker checkers at every bathroom. That's not enforceable in any way, and it's not. It shouldn't be done. And I'm afraid that with Trump in office, people are getting emboldened to say things that they wouldn't normally say and act ways that they wouldn't normally act. And I just want to caution everybody against that, because I'm kind of your right-leaning Christian, but you have to accept these people as human with flaws, and just know that you being a dick is not helpful.
100%. Absolutely. Yep. Being a dick is not going to make them realize, oh my God, you're so right, I should detransition. We do got to move on, Luke. I didn't realize how late actually in the show it was, so I really got to go, but I do appreciate this conversation, and I definitely invite you to call back if you have any more questions, okay?
It's been a pleasure. Thank y'all.
Thanks. Later.
Bye, Luke.
I also just want to say real quick before we wrap up that these conversations are being had by doctors and by medical organizations, by medical professionals. That's how we get to medical guidelines. That's how we get to consensus, where medical organizations feel comfortable making a statement about this is our position as an organization on an entire branch of medicine. These conversations are being had inter-community. We have talked extensively here about how a lot of trans folks want to get voice surgery and that there's a lot of risks and a lot of, I generally advise against voice surgery. If you really need it, definitely get it. Have a conversation with your doctor, find a good surgeon. However, there's a lot of risks where it often can make your situation worse, and I wouldn't want that for people. However, genital surgery, even for minors who had access to puberty blockers, well, they're not minors when they get surgery, they're 18 by that point, but for people who had puberty blockers as minors and then get genital surgery as adults, these conversations are already being had. But also, I just want to point out that somebody who was like, I have questions about medicine, Luke was able to do it like a fucking adult and actually brought some real information. Was like, hey, what about this? I've seen this. I don't understand this. Do you have information? What about this thing? Whereas the other dude, whatever this fucking his name was, I don't even remember because irrelevant, but was like, there's corruption and there's like lots of organizations, and that's all he fucking had. So I just want to point out for all the people who are like, you can't be respectful. I absolutely can be respectful if you are respectable.
And Luke was great. He was open to new information, and like I appreciate that quite a bit. And I would also just add, like, those conversations are definitely happening between doctors and like trans people and patients. They're not necessarily happening on Fox News. They're not happening in the media bubble that a lot of conservatives exist in. And that is what then gives rise to the ability to fearmonger, like, oh no, the kids are being trans. Like it is a deliberate propaganda tactic. Well, that certainly was a time. And I just want to remind you guys to check down in the description below for links to the original episode, links to the line itself if you want to subscribe, and you should. And also, remember, leave a like on this video, as well as the video for the actual episode, which, again, link down below. And comments also really help. So leave a comment here, leave a comment there, leave a comment everywhere. And also, check out their merch, Patreon, etc. Really cool to be a part of this project. And I hope you enjoyed it. Let's keep on going. And I'll see you next time.
Riverboat deck is coming to town. All the viewers gather round. Twitch and YouTube and swishy streams. All that content is bursting the scenes. Politics, gaming, and plenty more. Your sense of fashion you'll adore. So grab your stuff and hop aboard. We're going straight to Jack's Discord.